Imagine someone who is always kind, someone who used to smile at strangers on the street, who stayed up listening to friends on long, rainy nights, who believed that if they lived with integrity, the world would respond with gentleness. That person could be anyone, your neighbor, a colleague, or even you in some version of your past. He or she was someone who never hurt anyone, who always stood on the side of what was right. But then, one day, under the quiet glow of yellow light, they began doing something they didn't even realize was changing them. A small lie, a moment of coldness, a fleeting look of bitterness that passed and disappeared. No one is born evil. The shadow inside each of us doesn't appear with screams or blood, but through the tiniest things, the most reasonable, the most human things. Maybe it begins when you start believing, I have no other choice. When work weighs heavily, when life becomes harsh, when you feel like everything around you is working against you, you begin to justify the first scratches on your conscience. And the scary thing is, you believe it. Good people don't just turn cruel. That change doesn't explode in a single moment, but is a process, a silent current, like water dripping on stone, like time wearing down the memory of who I used to be. It sneaks in through excuses, through thoughts like everyone does it, or just this once. Under the right conditions, anyone can become the very person they once despised. History has proven this. In prisons, on battlefields, in laboratories, ordinary people, showing no signs of cruelty, suddenly inflict pain just because someone told them to. A man pushes a button to deliver electric shocks because it was an order. A guard enforces brutality because it's the job. They don't realize that moral boundaries don't collapse all at once. They crack, then crack further, until there's nothing left to hold them together. Maybe, if you've ever found yourself getting angry at someone you love, or saying something that hurt another even if just to defend yourself, then you've seen a glimpse of that darkness. It doesn't come from hatred, but from fear. Fear of getting hurt, fear of being seen as weak, fear of not being strong enough to fight the world. And so, we build armor. That armor thickens, day by day. Every time we say, it's okay, I'm just protecting myself, the armor hardens a little more until it covers the whole heart. From the outside, we may seem calm, strong, but inside, a part of us starts to die, the part that feels empathy, that aches, that still sees the pain in others. The death of compassion is silent. It doesn't scream, it simply retreats. Maybe it withdraws the first time we ignore something wrong, the second time, when we sneer instead of feeling sorrow, and by the third time, we can no longer tell right from wrong. People call it survival instinct. But sometimes that very instinct is the fire that slowly burns away the soul. So the question is not, why do good people become bad? But rather, what part of them fell asleep and let the darkness grow? Maybe it started when they stopped asking themselves questions, when they stopped reflecting each night, stopped wondering whether they had hurt someone today or forgiven anyone yet. Corruption is not an event, but a long sleep of the conscience. And the scariest part is that sleep is peaceful. It soothes us with a sense of safety, telling us we're fine, that we're still good people. But sometimes, that sense of safety is only a fog. Beneath it, darkness has already started to take root. Some call it the times. Some blame circumstances. Some say, everyone changes. All of that is true, but not enough. Because in every justification, there is always a silence we dare not touch, where, even for a fleeting second, we know we've lost something. A bit of kindness, a bit of honesty, a bit of our humanity. The path from light to darkness is rarely straight. It's a winding road, where each step is a small choice, and no one hears the quiet click when the door inside us begins to close, until one day, we look in the mirror and see that our eyes have changed. Something has hardened, shut down, as if we no longer recognize the person staring back. Maybe this transformation wasn't accidental. Maybe it began with a small crack, a harmless action, a seemingly thoughtless word. But from there, our inner boundaries began to blur. And eventually, we are no longer sure what's wrong and what's right. And from that very moment, darkness finds its way in. Because every act of moral decay begins with a pleasant reason, a gentle excuse. I did it to protect someone. I had no other choice. Nobody's perfect. Each of those lines is a brick, paving the road from kindness to cruelty. we don't notice. Because that road is lined with good-sounding words. That's why, when someone asks, "How does a good person become a monster?" the answer is rarely in a single moment. It lies in small moments, stacked one on top of the other, day after day. And by the time we notice, it's already too late to turn back. Maybe the scariest thing isn't evil itself, but the calm with which we look at it in ourselves and feel no surprise. The quiet voice within us, the one that once told us to stop slowly, fades away. And one day, it goes silent. Only silence remains. That silence is the line. Once it's crossed, a person begins to slide, unaware that they're falling. It always starts with erosion, small, light, seemingly harmless. But from there, morality begins to fade, layer by layer. And that is where the real story begins. When people start learning to allow themselves to do what they once condemned, simply because it's no big deal. Darkness rarely arrives with a scream. It comes with reasonable whispers. Small, seemingly harmless things begin to wear us down from within. A lie told to avoid trouble. A wrong action justified by "nobody's perfect." A hurtful act toward someone while telling ourselves, "I was just protecting myself." And just like that, the tiny crack in the glass of our conscience begins to spread. At first, we still feel a twinge of guilt, still hear something echoing inside. But then, we learn how to silence it. A sigh, a drink, a reason that sounds perfectly acceptable. Everyone does it. I didn't mean any harm. I just did what I had to do. And the first time we cross the line, we tell ourselves, "It's fine, just this once." But that "just this once" always comes back, like a clever trickster. It never bangs on the door, but slips in gently. So gently, we no longer recognize it for what it is. And so, step by step, we begin to descend, not out of cruelty, but out of exhaustion. When faced with the choice between what's right and what's easy, most will choose the easy way, because we believe we're still good people, just being more realistic, more wise, more grown up. But in truth, we're just teaching ourselves how to justify what is wrong. And each time we do, a piece of us fades small enough that no one notices, not even ourselves. Corruption never comes from a big decision. It comes from small slips, subtle compromises of the conscience. First, a lie to protect someone, then a secret to avoid trouble. Slowly, we grow used to the feeling of, "It's no big deal." Wrong becomes more comfortable. Honesty becomes inconvenient. We start seeing truth as a luxury and compromise as survival. People call this the slippery slope. Once you've stepped onto it, you don't need anyone to push. You'll start sliding on your own. There's no clear moment when you should stop, because every step still seems reasonable. Every time you bend a principle, you tell yourself you're still in control. But by the time you realize it, you've already strayed far from where you began. There are those who once swore they would never lie, but slowly learned to lie for good reason. Some who once believed hurting others was wrong, but later convinced themselves, "I'm just teaching them a lesson." Some who used to condemn injustice and now stay silent when they see it, simply because "I don't want any trouble." Every such word, every such act, lays down a stone on the path that leads us far from who we used to be. The truth is, none of us wake up one morning and decide, "From now on, I'll be a bad person." No. We're just tired, vulnerable, and want some peace. We don't realize that it's in those very moments of wanting peace that we lose the brightest parts of ourselves. A person doesn't have to be cruel to become bad. They only need to stay silent at the right moment. And that silence, sometimes, is more brutal than any action. Then, once we grow used to justifying ourselves, all boundaries begin to blur. What's right, what's wrong, what's good, what's bad, it all becomes relative. One misunderstanding can cloud the conscience, and we call it growing up. One moment of coldness can be praised as strength. We swap meanings, rename actions that hurt others, just to make them easier to accept. Corruption is never loud. It doesn't need violence. It only needs us to stop asking ourselves questions. Once we stop asking why, all limits begin to collapse. Because morality doesn't die in an explosion. It dies in silence, in those quiet moments when we know we're wrong, but choose to look away. One day, we realize we've changed. We no longer feel guilt when we lie. We no longer tremble when we do wrong. We feel nothing inside when someone else suffers. By then, darkness has dug in so deep that it feels like a natural part of us. We don't see it as darkness anymore. It wears the face of reason, of necessity, of realism. We don't even notice that we've made a trade, because everything happens so slowly, so quietly, so logically, like water, no one hears it eroding the stone. Until one day you look back and see half the stone is gone. The conscience is like that. It doesn't disappear with a bang, but dissolves, little by little. Perhaps the most dangerous thing isn't making a mistake, but learning how to live with it, treating it like it's normal. A person who once believed in goodness now scoffs when someone talks about morality. Not because they hate what's good, but because they no longer believe it's real. And when belief in goodness is gone, all that remains is a gray zone. Sometimes, in that very grayness, people feel at ease. No more inner battles, no more guilt. Everything is foggy, but peaceful. They begin to think, maybe this is what it means to be mature. But really, it's just the comfort of someone who's grown used to living in the dark. The first steps down the slope are never scary. What's scary is when we realize we've gone too far and still don't want to stop. Because by then, turning back means admitting we were wrong, that we betrayed ourselves. And for many, that's harder than death. And so, every small act, every silence, every time we tell ourselves it's nothing, they all pile up, creating an invisible force pulling us deeper. We think we're in control, but really, we're being led. Some people fall into the abyss without ever screaming because they no longer know they're falling. And when every sense of guilt has faded, what remains is only a cold emptiness. In that emptiness, anything can be justified: lies, cruelty, even silence in the face of someone else's pain. But before a person falls completely into the abyss, there is always a moment of stillness, a moment that, if we're sensitive, we can feel. Like the final breath of the conscience, just before it sinks, a fragile whisper, as if asking, "Am I still myself?" Most people never hear that question, because the noise of the world, of reasons, of fear, drowns it out. But some do hear it. Someone stops in the middle of the night, asking themselves who they've become. Someone quietly looks into another person's eyes and sees something familiar reflected there, a part of themselves they lost long ago. Sometimes, that very moment is the final line between light and darkness, because if we no longer hear that whisper, we begin to search for something else, to blame something, to carry the burden of a conscience we no longer want to hold. And that's when we start looking up to those in power, to louder voices, to more convenient commands, in order to justify ourselves. From that point on, darkness is no longer something we run from. It becomes something we serve. When people begin to allow themselves to fall, they often look for something to hold on to: a reason, a voice, a command, loud enough to convince them they are simply following orders. Maybe that is the easiest way to avoid facing themselves, to hand over the reins of conscience to someone else. A man in a neat suit, hand resting on a button, is asked to press it in the name of research. He hears cries of pain from the room next door, but still he continues. He doesn't laugh, doesn't rage, doesn't rejoice. He simply presses the button because someone in authority told him to. Somewhere in that moment, his human side trembles. But then the voice speaks again. "You're not responsible. I am." And so he goes on. We like to think we are strong, that we would never do something cruel just because we were told to. But history and real life often prove the opposite. At work, a cold-hearted boss orders cost cuts, knowing it will result in dozens losing their jobs. The employee quietly obeys. In the military, a young soldier is ordered to clean up the area, and everyone understands what that really means. He does it, not because he wants to, but because he doesn't dare resist. At home, a child is taught, "Don't talk back to adults." And as they grow, they learn to stay silent in the face of wrong, simply because they fear losing love or approval. Obedience can be disguised as responsibility. I had no choice. I was just following orders. If I didn't do it, someone else would. These phrases are shields for fear. We believe we're innocent because we're only playing a small part in someone else's chain of actions. But what we fail to see is that it's our obedience that allows evil to grow little by little through hands that seem harmless. Darkness doesn't need villains. It only needs obedient people. People who don't want trouble, who don't want to stand out, who don't want to take responsibility. It loves order, compliance, silence. And when we stop questioning, stop resisting, stop feeling uneasy, that's when we've already become its tool without even knowing it. But the most frightening thing is how we comfort ourselves. I didn't do anything wrong. I was just following orders. I have no power to change anything. These words, over time, become a tight collar, choking both mind and heart. Every time we feel fear, they ring in our heads, offering relief while also pulling us further from our true self. If you've ever stayed silent in the face of injustice, even in a small room, in a private conversation, you'll know that feeling. That moment when you know something is wrong, but you bow your head, force a smile, because you don't want to lose the fragile sense of safety. In that moment, you are betraying what you believe in. And if you felt that, know that you're not alone. We all have moments of weakness. Maybe you're hearing these words, and somewhere in your heart, a small part of you wants to speak up. Don't let it stay silent. Share that feeling, write it, say it, tell someone, or simply hit like or leave a comment. Not because I need the numbers, but because sometimes the smallest signal of empathy is enough to remind someone that they haven't fully lost their humanity. Because darkness grows in silence, and light, no matter how faint, always begins with a single voice. But still, like the man in the lab, we keep pressing the button. Because when everyone else around us does the same, stopping suddenly seems dangerous. In the comfort of collective agreement, evil no longer looks like evil. It becomes procedure, responsibility, someone else's job. Collective evil is always wrapped in the cloak of order and duty. Obedience makes us feel safe, but it also makes us forget how to think. When a person grows too used to following, they lose their sense of right and wrong. And when that sense fades, they'll do anything they're told, as long as someone assures them everything's fine. No one wakes up and says, "Today, I will become a bad person." But many wake up and say, "Today, I just want to do my job well." And these people, over time, become instruments of the very things they once despised. Because in this world, darkness rarely wears the face of a monster. It usually takes on the face of duty, of order, of loyalty. They say, hell is paved with good intentions. That saying has never been more true. Sometimes we walk down the wrong path not because we want to, but because we believe we're doing the right thing. One person protects their conscience with a reason. Another defends their cowardice under the name of duty. And when everyone believes we're just doing what's necessary, the world begins to change. Think about how people behave in daily life. An employee follows a policy they know is unjust. A friend watches someone get hurt and says nothing. A lover stays in a toxic relationship just because it makes the other person happy. Every action seems innocent, but it is submission, the fear of being different, that makes darkness stronger. We think silence is neutral, but it's not. Silence is complicity. When we stay quiet in the face of wrong, we are feeding it. And so, even without holding the knife, we help create the wound. People can live a long time in obedience because it brings peace. No need to take responsibility. No need to think. No need to face the truth. Just follow orders. But what is the cost? One day, you look back and no longer recognize yourself. When you've spent too long listening to someone else's commands, your own inner voice becomes distant, faint, and eventually disappears. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, you may still hear a small echo. Can I stop this? But then, you remember the warnings, the watching eyes, the fear of being cast out, and you go on. Evil doesn't need threats. It only needs an environment where people fear being alone. Because deep down, we crave belonging, to be accepted, to be seen, to feel safe in a group. And that very craving makes us most obedient. When the crowd moves in one direction, the one who stands still becomes the threat. So we go along, even when our heart knows the path is wrong. Obedience isn't born only from fear. It also comes from the need to be validated. We want to believe we're on the right side. And if those in power say this is right, we believe it. That belief becomes both a shelter and the sweetest trap. Eventually, the line between the individual and the group fades. We're no longer me, but become us. And within that us, all guilt dissolves. No one is responsible because everyone else did the same. So those who were once kind, once compassionate, are now only parts of a machine that no longer knows how to stop, no longer knows how to feel. But just before we disappear completely, in the final moment of awareness, there are still those who ask themselves, if I stop now, will the world collapse? And the answer is always, no. The world won't fall apart, but you might lose your place, your peace, your sense of belonging. And that is what most people fear the most. When darkness learns to speak in the voice of order, and when obedience becomes a virtue, no one needs to be forced anymore. They will follow willingly. And from those very steps of submission, something else begins to take root, stronger, more dangerous. The feeling of belonging to a group, a belief, a side of your own. Once again, we tell ourselves, we're not bad, we're just on the right side. But it is in that very moment that division begins, and darkness, once again, takes on a new face. When people begin to seek a place to belong, darkness finds a new form, a crowd. In a crowd, we are no longer I. We become we. And wherever there is a we, there will be a them. At first, this separation is small, a difference in opinion, a disagreement over lifestyle, religion, skin color, or belief. But humans cannot endure ambiguity. We want clarity: who is right, who is wrong, who is friend, who is foe. And so, to reinforce our sense of safety, we draw lines. On this side is the light. On the other side, the dark. On this side are the good people. On the other, those who deserve contempt. In the first groups humans form, there is always an initial warmth. The feeling of being understood, of unity, of standing together. But along with belonging, there is always a price. We must learn to see others as outsiders. And from there, something subtle inside us begins to shift. We become less empathetic, quicker to judge. We laugh at others' failures, simply because they belong to the other side. This separation happens quietly, but deeply. It begins in thought, spreads to words, and finally becomes action. We no longer call others by their names, but by labels. Those people, that bunch, their side. And the moment we stop seeing the human in another, cruelty becomes easier. Human history is a long chain of this very process. People have burned, killed, and excluded in the name of justice, religion, freedom, and even love. Those who commit such acts never think of themselves as evil. They believe they are doing what is right because our side is defending the truth. Evil never starts with hatred. It begins with the belief that we are right and they are wrong. Online, in conversations, at work, or even within families, we see this cycle repeat. Someone disagrees, and instead of listening, the group throws mockery, condescension. No need for logic, just a label: fool, hypocrite, clueless. And just like that, they're pushed out, stripped of their right to be heard, while we feel reassured because at least we're on the right side. This is the false comfort of the crowd. When we blend into the collective outcry, we feel powerful because our voice joins thousands. We no longer feel guilt because everyone does it. We no longer feel responsible because I'm just saying what everyone knows. But the terrifying truth is, in that very moment, our humanity begins to fracture. Imagine seeing someone being mistreated, while the crowd either watches or, worse, pulls out their phones to film. You know it's wrong, but you say nothing, because speaking up means going against the crowd, because you fear being different, being mocked, being cast out. In that moment, you choose silence, and in silence, evil grows. Dehumanization is not some distant concept. It happens every day, in words that seem harmless. When we call someone a thing, it, that one, we strip away a piece of their humanity. When we laugh at someone's pain, simply because they deserve it, we allow ourselves to step further away from the edge of compassion. The modern world may be civilized, but darkness still wears the same shape. It doesn't need swords, just fingers typing on keyboards, sneers in a comment thread, Indifferent laughs when someone falls. People are learning how to cause harm without ever touching anyone. And the most tragic part is, we think we're right. When we belong to a group, we believe we're fighting for justice. We believe we're protecting what is good. And to do that, we allow ourselves to do what is wrong because they deserve it, because they're dangerous, because we're just defending ourselves. Layer by layer, evil is wrapped in the cloak of righteousness. Evil no longer wears a mask. It wears symbols, flags, slogans. It marches with the crowd, cheered on, justified, called by beautiful names: belief, duty, responsibility. And people follow, joyful, convinced they are doing the right thing. But there is one truth no one says out loud. The more convinced we are that we're right, the more blind we become. When belief becomes absolute, we can no longer hear the voice of conscience. Because in our minds, evil has changed its name. It's no longer a sin. It's a necessary sacrifice. Look at the wars, the tragedies, the abuse, in both history and daily life. Every side believes they are the good ones. Every side has their reasons. No one claims to be the villain because everyone has their own story to justify themselves. And so, people keep killing one another while still believing they are doing good. Dehumanization doesn't only destroy the victim, it also destroys the one who inflicts it. Because when we stop seeing others as human, we also begin to lose the human inside ourselves. We no longer feel pain, no longer know sorrow, no longer tremble at the sight of blood or tears. Everything becomes normal, and that is the most frightening thing of all. Because true evil is not loud, it's not the screaming, it's the silence, the indifferent glance, the cold smile, the words, "They had it coming," said with ease. And when that silence becomes a habit, the world begins to change its color. Not entirely black, but no longer clear. A grayness spreads across everything, dull, tired, and full of justifications. In that gray, people no longer know where the lines are. But deep inside the mind, in a hidden corner, there's still a small part, a faint light that wants to ask, when I see others as enemies, am I really protecting what's good or just shielding my own fear? That question is small, fragile like a breath. But if we can still hear it, there is still hope. Because even within the crowd, there are those who remain awake, those who understand that the moment we stop seeing others as human is the moment we must stop ourselves. Because beyond that line, it's no longer just difference. It is the abyss. No one thinks of themselves as a bad person. Even when they're doing something cruel, most still believe they're right, that they're only doing what needs to be done. Humans have a strange ability to justify their own wrongdoing with reasons that sound perfectly reasonable. And it's that very reasonableness that allows darkness to survive not through resistance, but through sweet acceptance. When someone hurts another, they rarely say, "I did it because I'm cruel." No, they say, because they deserved it, because I had no other choice, because I'm only giving back what I got. And every time those words are spoken, conscience takes another step back. Evil doesn't need hatred to thrive. It only needs justification. A man may lie to the woman he loves, believing it's to protect her. A mother may punish her child harshly, believing it's to teach them how to grow. An employee may do something wrong, thinking, "I'm just following the rules." And just like that, piece by piece, evil is built not by the merciless, but by those who believe they're doing what's right. We fear guilt. It makes us uneasy, forces us to face ourselves. So when action and belief collide, we don't change the action, we change the belief. That's how the mind protects itself. We edit reality, bend logic, rewrite the story to make it sound more moral. I'm not wrong. I'm just reacting. I'm not doing harm. I'm doing what's necessary. I'm not hurting them. I'm teaching them a lesson. That's how people can do terrible things and still sleep soundly at night. They don't feel guilty because they believe they're righteous. And when we believe we're righteous, conscience becomes something we reshape to fit our story. Evil always knows how to wear the mask of good. It doesn't strike openly. It smiles, dresses in the clothes of virtue, and says, "I'm only protecting what's right." But every time we justify cruelty, lies, or someone else's pain, we're allowing darkness to wear the white robe of justice. Think of the moments you've comforted yourself after doing something wrong. That relief when you thought, "They had it coming," Or when you saw someone suffer and quietly thought, that's the consequence. In that moment, we feel fair, strong, maybe even noble. But the truth is, that's when we rob ourselves of empathy. Self-justification blinds us. It lets us believe we're still good, even as we act against our own values. Worse, it convinces us that those who oppose us must be bad. The cycle continues until we no longer feel the need to stop. Evil, when wrapped in righteousness, becomes impossible to reason with. How do you convince someone they're wrong when in their heart they believe they're doing good? They'll look at you, at everyone else, and say, "You don't understand. I'm just trying to save the world." And in the name of what's good, they may commit the worst of deeds. Sometimes the feeling of, "I'm a good person," is the most dangerous feeling of all. When we believe in that image too strongly, we stop accepting the possibility that we might be wrong. All mistakes get projected onto others. We begin to think we stand above other people's morality, that we have the right to judge, correct, even punish. And from there, a new poison forms moral superiority. The more someone believes they're pure, the easier it becomes to justify doing wrong. I did something bad, but for a good reason. I caused pain, but they needed the lesson. I lied, but it was to protect a bigger truth. The trap of righteousness is this. We think we're immune to darkness. But in truth, the moment we believe we can't fall, we've already taken our first step into the abyss. Because then, we stop watching ourselves. We only watch others. And when we only look outward, we always see what's wrong but never notice our own hand adding to it. Someone once said, "No one is more dangerous than the person doing wrong who believes they're doing right." History is full of such people. Those who oppress in the name of morality, those who kill in the name of justice, those who stay silent in the name of wisdom. None of them thought they were evil. Every one of them believed they were the hero. In daily life, this still happens, only smaller, subtler. Someone hurts another in a relationship, then says, "I just want what's best for them." Someone spreads a rumor, then tells themselves, "I'm just warning others." Someone cuts someone out of their life, then says, "I'm just protecting my energy." These words sound reasonable, modern, even right, until you realize that behind them lies fear and self-defense, wrapped in beautiful language. We've become skilled at lying without feeling guilty. So skilled, we no longer lie to others, we only need to lie to ourselves. But there's one thing we can never escape. The deepest part of our being, where the conscience lives, still knows. It doesn't speak, it senses. It keeps us awake at night, leaves us drained after victory, makes us feel empty even when everything seems perfect. That's how darkness reveals itself, not with blood, but with silence. Evil isn't a scream. It's a fake calm, a feeling that everything's fine while inside, we're slowly rotting. It's the moment we stop feeling. When guilt disappears, we think we've grown. But really, a part of us has died. And then, one day, we meet someone who reflects back the person we used to be. Someone who reminds us of kindness, of honesty, of the light that faded in us. They don't say much. They just look at us with the eyes we once had. And in that moment, all our justifications go quiet. Because truth, even buried in dust, still finds a way to make us tremble. But not everyone hears that call. Some have walked too far down the road of self-justification. So far they no longer know what's real. And when the conscience goes quiet, when the heart feels nothing, a person no longer needs a reason to be cruel. They do it simply because they can. From obedience to division, and then to self-justification, darkness has come a long way. And now, it no longer hides. It stands tall, proud, under the banner of righteousness. And when that happens, a new chapter begins, where people not only justify their own wrongs, but believe they have the right to judge, to fix, and to punish others in the name of morality. That's when evil wears the face of justice, and it begins to smile. No one becomes more blind than when they believe they are on the right side. There is no doubt, no self-questioning, only belief. A belief as cold and hard as steel. They no longer see the need to listen, because in their minds, they hold the truth. And it is in that moment that evil puts on the face of righteousness. The most dangerous thing in the world is not hatred, but the absolute belief that we are better than others. When we believe we are pure, We allow ourselves to do anything to protect that purity. Every harm we cause is painted with the words, "they deserved it." Those who have suffered the most sometimes become the ones who make others suffer because they believe they understand what pain is. Someone betrayed may become controlling, saying, "I just don't want to be hurt again." Someone who was insulted may speak cruelly, believing they need to know how it feels. Every word and action takes on the shape of justice, but in truth, it is fear dressed in the language of morality. We begin to assume the right to judge. When someone fails, instead of seeing their weakness, we see an enemy. When someone shares a different view, instead of listening, we look for ways to tear them down, because we believe we are defending the truth. But sometimes what we are defending is only our own ego. Evil, in the shape of righteousness, is hard to recognize because it speaks the language of virtue. It says, "I just want fairness. I'm speaking for the voiceless. I do this for justice." And while saying these words, it still wounds, still silences, still tramples others in the name of truth. You may have seen this online, in arguments, or in real life. People no longer speak to understand, but to win. They don't debate to find the truth, but to protect their pride. And in those battles, compassion is the first thing sacrificed. We forget that behind every person is a story, a fear, a wound, a reason. When we stop seeing that, we stop seeing the human. And when we stop seeing the human, we are capable of anything. Today's world makes this easier than ever. With a single comment, a share, a criticism, we can hurt someone without ever seeing their face. We don't hear the tremble in their voice or see the way their eyes drop. They become just a name, some letters, a profile picture. No more emotion, only a target. And in that moment, dehumanization returns. But this time, it doesn't need flags or guns or war. It only needs a phone, a social platform, a judgment. People throw stones, ruin reputations, slander, shame, all in the name of justice. But justice without compassion is only revenge dressed up in reason. The irony is, the more we believe we are good, the easier it becomes to justify doing wrong. Someone who donates to charity in the morning may lie in the afternoon without guilt, thinking, "I've done good today." Someone who believes they are moral may judge others more harshly, saying, "I just have high standards." Someone who thinks they're sacrificing for a noble cause may bring pain to thousands and feel proud doing it. The blindness of righteousness is the most dangerous thing of all. It makes us believe we are immune to darkness, even as it stands right behind us, smiling. The more someone believes they stand in the light, the easier it is for them to think every action they take is allowed. And when that happens, evil no longer needs to hide. It can walk in broad daylight, applauded, cheered, called names like justice, defense of what's right, fight for truth. But truth doesn't need to be protected with violence. Justice doesn't need to be upheld with contempt. Only fear drives people to use harm to prove their beliefs. Evil in our time no longer needs war to spread. It hides in words, in looks, in scorn. A mocking comment, a cruel remark, a silent boycott, all can become weapons. And we wield them without hesitation, because we believe we are right. But when everyone believes they're right, the world becomes a prison of prideful consciences. No one listens, no one admits wrong, no one feels the need to forgive. And when forgiveness dies, so does compassion. In the quiet of night, when there's no one left to argue with, we may still hear a small voice whispering, "Am I becoming what I once hated?" Most ignore that voice. They turn on music, scroll the screen, keep themselves busy. But some pause just for a second, and they feel it, that emptiness, like the silence that follows after anger has passed. That feeling is fragile, but it's real. Because in that moment, we realize that behind our battles for what's right, what we truly seek is to feel like we matter. We don't fight to defend truth. We fight to protect our image in the eyes of others and in our own. And when we understand that, a small crack of light opens. Not to end the fight, but to look within. Because people only become dangerous when they stop asking, "Why am I doing this?" If we can stop just for a moment before judging someone, if we can ask, "Am I sure?" then maybe we've saved something in ourselves. Because evil doesn't truly win with power. It wins through apathy. It grows when we stop questioning our own righteousness. when we believe that light belongs only to us and darkness only to others. But the world isn't divided like that. Light and dark don't stand on opposite sides. They cross through every heart. Every one of us carries both. And what keeps us human is not the belief that we are good, but the ability to recognize that we can be wrong. Just one moment of asking, am I hurting someone in the name of what's right? That is already the beginning of light. Because when judgment pauses, empathy can return. And sometimes just a softer gaze, a slower breath, is enough to pull us back from the edge we helped create. Because in the end, evil is not the person out there. It is the part in us, the part that justifies, that fears, that wants to prove we're better. And if we don't learn to face that part, one day we will become exactly what we once condemned. Only when we dare to admit we are not perfect will darkness have no place to hide. But that journey is not easy, because before we can learn to forgive others, we must first learn to forgive ourselves. And that is something few are brave enough to do. Perhaps the hardest thing is not recognizing the darkness outside, but accepting that it lives within us. People are often afraid to look at evil, but the scarier truth is this: evil doesn't come from the outside. It grows from the small choices we make every day. And eventually, we must face the most uncomfortable question of all. Am I really any different from them? The truth is, no one is immune. Under enough pressure, enough fear, enough loneliness, enough justification, anyone can lose themselves. But that doesn't mean we're destined to fall. Darkness always exists, but so does the light. The difference lies in whether we have the courage to face it or whether we choose to turn away. Awareness doesn't come from believing we're good. It comes from admitting we are capable of being wrong. That's humility, the ability to say, I could be wrong. I could hurt someone. Because only when we accept that we can go astray can we truly keep ourselves from doing so. Self-awareness is the first wall that holds back the spread of darkness. It's not a shield, but a mirror. Each day, we look into it and ask, am I justifying something today? Am I looking down on someone just because they think differently from me? Am I causing pain while convincing myself I'm doing the right thing? Those questions, though hard to ask, are the rope that can pull us back from the edge. But awareness alone isn't enough. Because people can know they're wrong and still go ahead anyway. Between knowing and stopping, there's a wide gap. And the bridge between those two is called courage. Moral courage is not shouting in the crowd, but standing still when everyone else is running in the wrong direction. It's saying no when silence would be easier. It's accepting loss to preserve a piece of your integrity. The world isn't lacking in people who think right or understand right. What's rare is someone who dares to live right, someone who's willing to hurt for it, someone who accepts the cost of staying human. History has always had such people quiet, unnoticed, but they are the reason humanity hasn't completely collapsed. Every time someone dares to say, enough, dares to protect the weak, dares to apologize, dares to forgive, the world becomes a little brighter. Light never disappears. It only needs someone brave enough to turn it on. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's feeling afraid, but acting anyway. No one is free from fear. We fear losing our job, being disliked, being excluded, getting hurt. But if we let fear lead us, it rewrites our whole story. A life led by fear is a life stripped of freedom, not external freedom, but inner freedom. Evil outside only grows strong when we fear facing it inside. Because if we understand ourselves, if we see our own darkness and choose not to let it rule us, then no matter how chaotic the world becomes, we can still choose the light. And that choice, even if small, is the most powerful act a human can make. But light doesn't survive on courage alone. It also needs something else: empathy. Empathy is the only thread that keeps us close when the world begins to break apart. When we truly see the fear, the pain, the vulnerability in another person, we can't hurt them. We can't see them as the enemy, because we realize they're fighting the same darkness we are. Empathy is not weakness. It's the strength of those who choose to feel, while others choose to numb. It's the courage to look at someone who's done wrong and still see a human being. To believe that even in the worst person, there is a part that still wants to be good. When we have empathy, we no longer want to win. We just want to understand. And when we understand, violence loses its reason to exist. Because hatred cannot live in the same space as empathy. One of them has to disappear. The world today doesn't lack intelligence. It lacks understanding. It doesn't lack voices. It lacks hearts that truly listen. If each person paused, just for a moment not to respond, but to really hear, we'd see that the gap between us and them isn't so big. We all fear, we all hurt, we all crave love, recognition, and forgiveness. Every battle, no matter its name, begins from one root: the fear of not being loved. And every act of cruelty, every hatred, every division is just the twisted cry of that fear. When we understand this, compassion returns. But even with compassion, we must remain watchful. Because darkness doesn't die, it sleeps. It waits for us to grow tired, to let our guard down, to believe we've moved past it. The moment we think we're safe is the moment it begins to rise again. Corruption doesn't happen overnight, and neither does redemption. Both are slow processes, careful, deliberate, and patient. We must watch ourselves every day in how we speak, how we look, how we judge others. We must ask, is this coming from love or from fear? That question, though simple, can change everything. Every day, we face a choice: reaction or awareness, judgment or understanding, fear or courage. And every time we choose right, even just once, the light grows a little stronger. Maybe the world won't change overnight. Maybe darkness still surrounds us. But as long as there is a small light inside us, a place untouched by hatred or pride, then darkness will never fully win. Because light doesn't have to be big to exist. It just has to stay alive. And perhaps the scariest thing is not that we have a dark side, but that we refuse to see it. Because when we dare to face it, darkness no longer controls us. It simply becomes a part of our journey, the part that helps us understand humanity, our weakness, and our capacity to love. In the end, the difference between a good person and a monster is not in their nature, but in their choices. The choice to look, the choice to understand, the choice to stop, the choice to begin again. And in the moment we choose light, even in just one thought, one gesture, we make this world a little less cruel. As someone once wrote, the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. The final question is no longer, who is good? Who is evil? But who are we becoming? Because the world doesn't need more perfect people. It just needs more people willing to face their darkness and still choose the light. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this story. If this message touched your heart, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you'll never miss the next journey we take together. Your support means the world to me.